Are you planning a trip to Scotland? Are you looking for advice and tips about places to visit and things to see? Or are you looking for a one-to-one consultation to plan a completely unique and memorable trip to Scotland? Whatever your requirements, Scottish travel blogger, writer and itinerary planner Suzanne from Adventures Around Scotland has you covered, with either her Scottish travel guide, her Scottish travel blog, or her travel consultation service. So what are you waiting for? Visit adventuresaroundscotland.com and start your journey to bonnie Scotland. All information is in the show notes. So today I'm joined by Nicky and Greg from the Culture Swally. Hey guys, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dawn. Thanks for having us.
So you started the Culture Swally in September 2020, and in each episode you celebrate the best of Scottish film and TV shows, as well as taking a look at more bizarre and funny stories from Scotland. So can you tell us, how did the Culture Swally come about?
I mean, it came about just by purely kind of a group chat with me and Greg. I mean, Greg and I have been friends for like over 20 odd years now, Greg. I think like 22 years.
Yeah.
And we both listen to a lot of podcasts, and it was one of those, I think, we're probably had a few glasses of wine one night and texting each other, and we're like, you know what, we should start a podcast. No idea what to do. So I think we did a test episode about 2 years before we even released our first episode. And we had no idea. In fact, in that group chat that night, I came up with the name. I was like, you know what, we'll call it the Culture Swally. But we had no idea. And we just thought, right, let's just review films, TV shows, music, whatever. So we did a test episode. I think we covered, was it Oasis? Definitely, maybe.
Yeah, I think we did the test episode before you came up with a name, because we couldn't quite decide. Because Nicky and I have always, the reason that we're such good friends is we've always had tons in common, like music, books, films, and stuff. And we're like, well, you know, there's a lot of podcasts that are like review shows. There's one that we both quite enjoy called The Rewatchables, an American one where they don't really review, but they discuss movies that could be described as rewatchable films. And we're like, well, what could it be? And so we did what Nicky's talking about. We had to look at Definitely Maybe, because it was an album that we both really liked, and it was important to both of us. And we did that as the test. And then a bit later on, I think Nicky came up with the idea of focusing on Scottish things, because there's not really a great deal of podcasts. Like there's Scots We Hey, which we've found through the Scottish podcast collaboration, but not really a great deal of podcasts that talk about Scottish films and Scottish television shows. And Nicky came up with a brilliant name, the Culture Swally. And I think that was really the sort of catalyst. I think when you came up with the name, Nicky, that's what sort of inspired us to go along those lines. The kind of news thing came a wee bit later, after we'd had the idea to talk about Scottish media. So yeah, it just kind of went from there, you know, and it's just good fun, isn't it? We just have a good laugh every 2 weeks, pretty much.
Yeah, just a passion, isn't it? You took your passion and did it as a podcast.
Yeah.
So you've covered so many Scottish films and TV programmes that I've watched growing up and loved as well, such as Trainspotting, The Wee Man, The Wicker Man, City Lights, Scotch and Rye, and the pilot episode of Taggart. These are the episodes that have struck a chord in me. But what are your favourite episodes that you've done so far, and why?
I think it's exactly as you described. When we came up with the idea of doing Scottish things, we like instantly together like reeled off to each other all these things we remembered, and it was exactly as you say, like City Lights or The High Life, or you know, Rhapsody Nesbitt, things that just absolutely adored. I think one of my favorite episodes that we've done is Bob Servant Independent, and it's probably just because it's a show that Greg and I both absolutely adored. And if you listen to that episode, it's effectively like an hour and a half of us just quoting Bob Servant quotes to each other and just laughing about hysterically. And I think what made that episode so special was that the actual creator of Bob Servant, Neil Forsyth, actually listened to the episode and retweeted us.
Really?
And because I woke up one morning and I was like, I think there's something wrong with our podcast server, Greg, because we've had like about 300 downloads overnight. And they just keep going up and up and up. We find out it was because, Neil Forsyth had retweeted and said, I really enjoyed listening to this.
That's amazing.
So I think
kudos.
That's a special episode for me. And also because it's probably one of my favorite pieces that we've ever covered, because I just absolutely adore that show. But there's so many great ones. Almost everything we cover, I just kind of end up falling in love with. I mean, I think you're probably the same, Greg. There's not much we haven't covered that we don't enjoy. There's been the odd one or two, but just about everything we just love.
I asked you that one day, didn't I, Greg, in the story episode we did, and you mentioned the Crankies episode, was it? Episode 37?
Yeah, for
Christmas.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like, we sort of decided in the first year, when it comes up to December, we should do something festive and something sort of kind of Hogmanay-ish, if I can invent a new word. And so, like, the first year we found stuff, and then the second year, I had made some kind of joke about the Crankies, and Nicky brilliantly found an episode of the Crankies Club at Christmas from like 1982 or 1983, and he sent me the links on YouTube. And I was working at home because it was still, we're still at the sort of fag end of the pandemic, and I was doing a bit of work at home, so I thought I'll just click on it and watch a bit of it. I ended up watching the whole thing because, like, when I was a kid in Glasgow, the Crankies were like rock stars. You know what I mean? Like early 80s, they were on Cracker Jack. They had their own TV show. They would play at the Pavilion in Glasgow quite regularly. And I remember my mum taking me to see them after her and my dad split up. Like quite soon after, she got tickets to see the Crankies at the Pavilion, supported by Bobby Davro. So my mother says that I can't quite remember, but I know better than to argue with her. And so the Crankies have always been like a big part of, when I think back to my childhood in Scotland. So I end up watching, I was supposed to be working, I end up watching this whole episode. I was like to Nicky, we're definitely doing this at Christmas. This is absolutely brilliant. It was good fun. It was good fun talking about that episode of the Crankies, for sure.
For people that haven't listened to the Culture Swally before, would it be these two episodes that you would recommend they start with? Or would there be another one you'd think would be better?
Yeah, they're both good episodes. I think I mentioned on the story episode I did with you, Dawn, like we did one recently in Halloween. We covered a Gov and Ghost story, which was written by Brian Elsey, who wrote Skins, and he adapted The Crow Road for BBC Scotland and those other things. And we had never seen it, and that turned out to be a fun episode as well. It's a good one. Yeah.
I think that was a gem. There's been a few that we'd recommend. I think when we did Restless Natives, that was a good episode as well. And I think when we did A Shot at Glory, which we didn't do the news that week. We covered our favorite Scotland World Cup songs, and we went through like 4 or 5 the World Cup songs, including the Crankies, I think, as well. The Crankies seem to be a theme. So I mean, I think they are good, but I would recommend that listeners, it's like any podcast that reviews things, you have a look through the list and you pick out the things that you recognize or that mean a lot to you. Because I listen to a few film review podcasts, and I always just look for, have they done Ghostbusters? Have they done, Back to the Future? Kind of my favorite films. And then I'll listen to them and I'll know if they're on my level because how they appreciate it. So I would recommend anyone just to have a look at what we've covered and just see whatever tickles your fancy.
Yeah, I would recommend having a listen. It's great. It's just nostalgic. I said that to you. It's all these old memories coming back. It's great listening to you.
Yeah, there's a lot of good memories, and there's a lot of stuff that you're watching. And in fact, I mean, we noticed that in one of our recent episodes. That, in fact, the episode will be out next week when we did That Sinking Feeling. And there's a lot of stuff that in fact, there's not a lot of stuff that we watch from Scotland that we think you wouldn't get away with that nowadays. Like apart from the Crankies, which makes me think like Scotland was so progressive, and it always has been, because even in That Sinking Feeling, they cover a kind of cross-dressing, and it's not like a made fun of. It's something that's kind of well received. And I think we find that a lot in the stuff we watch, that Scotland's always been a progressive and kind of welcoming country, and there's not a lot that we're kind of like, you couldn't say that nowadays, which I think says a lot for us Scots.
It does.
Sure, yeah. To Nicky's point, I think there's a general feeling in Scotland of acceptance, and there always
Hmm.
has been, and I think it comes from, as Scots, we're quite proud of where we come from, and we want to sort of showcase it whenever we get the opportunity, whether that's doing a podcast or whether that's bumping into somebody from another country who happens to be in Glasgow or Aberdeen or wherever for work or a visit, and you kind of want to show them the best of where you come from. And I think Scotland's always had that mentality. Like, to Nicky's point, that sinking feeling, it doesn't poke fun at cross dressing at all. You know what I mean? I don't feel like it does anyway. It's
No.
not it's not sort of like Russ Abbott and Les Dennis dressed up as women on like a Saturday night. It's not that kind of humor, It's all part of the story. Yeah, so I think for us, we'd like it if people just sort of listen to the podcast and it got them interested in Scotland and in the absolutely fantastic movies and films and culture that they produce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's a great podcast that you're doing that, because like you say, there isn't anything out there that just focuses on what Scotland does, what Scotland has, which is the point of the Scottish collaboration, to just highlight great Scottish content. So tell me, what is coming up for the Culture Swally and what's in store for next year?
Oh, next year. I mean, well, coming up, we have obviously the Scottish Podcast Network collaboration. So we're doing a collaboration with Mum's Mysteries and Murder, and we're going to be covering Des, the ITV miniseries. And then we have our Christmas and New Year episodes coming up, which is something very exciting. But then, to be honest, in terms of next year, we genuinely don't know what we're going to cover. And this is the thing. Greg and I, at the end of each episode, we take it in turns to pick. Genuinely, we don't know what the other one is going to pick next. So it could be absolutely anything, but as long as it's Scottish, obviously. So we don't actually have like a calendar planned or anything. So we genuinely have no idea. I mean, I have a few ideas in mind, but in fact, at the beginning of this year, for example, I had maybe 10 things I wanted to cover. And I think I've ended up covering 2 of them because other things have just cropped up or in conversation. And then I think, oh, wait a minute, I need to watch that. And everything goes out the window. It just literally the day before we record, I kind of decide what we're going to do next.
Okay. And what about if anybody's got any recommendations for you then for what they want you to cover? How do they get in touch with you?
Well, we do say if anyone wants to get in touch with us and recommend anything they want us to cover, then they can get in touch with us on Instagram at Culture Swally Pod, or they can send us an email on cultureswally@gmail.com.
Fantastic. It has been really great talking to you. Thanks very much for coming on, and I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next for you.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having us on, Dawn. Really much appreciated.
And that's my wee chat for the Scottish collaboration with Nicky and Greg from the Culture Swally. Don't forget that Nicky and Greg will also be releasing an episode about the programme Des, which features David Tennant, during the Scottish Collaboration Week with Effie and Marty from the Mum's Mysteries and Murder podcast. And Nicky and Greg will also be speaking to Alistair from the Scots Way Hey podcast, who I also spoke with on his podcast for the collab too. So you don't miss a thing during the Scottish Collab Week. A full schedule of episodes and participants can be found at scottishmurders.com/collab.